Hello and welcome to People Deserve to Live. I'm Sam.
And I'm Shirin. Thank you for joining us.
Today we're looking at the current war not as a story of government, not as a story of military strategy, and not as a story of who's winning or losing on paper.
We're looking at it as a human story, a regional story, because once a war reaches this level, it doesn't stay between states, it spreads outward into everyday life across the Middle East.
Into hospitals, airports, border crossings, shipping routes, schools, food prices, family decisions.
And that's the focus of this episode, what ordinary people across the Middle East are living through right now.
Because even if someone is far from the front line, they may still be feeling the war through fear, disruption, shortages, rising costs, travel problems, or the uncertainty of not knowing what comes next.
And that uncertainty matters, because when conflict expands, daily life becomes unstable, even in places where there may not be direct bombing or mass displacement. That's when war starts changing the emotional climate of a whole region.
One of the easiest mistakes people make when they follow a war is to focus only on official announcements, military strikes, retaliation, maps, and statements from governments.
But that only tells part of the story. The wider regional story is now a civilian story.
A story about whether medicine is reaching hospitals, whether flights are still operating, whether families can move across borders, whether food costs are rising, whether aid can get through, whether parents feel safe enough to send children to school.
Exactly, because displacement is not one single event. It's a chain reaction. Someone leaves home and suddenly everything becomes uncertain. Food, privacy, health, hygiene, schooling, work, transportation, and emotional stability.
And health services in Lebanon are also under enormous pressure. When medical facilities are damaged or overcrowded, the consequences spread far beyond direct casualties.
A person needing urgent care may wait longer. A pregnant woman may lose access to proper support. A child with asthma or infection may struggle to get treatment. Someone with diabetes or heart disease may miss medication or follow-up.
And that's what war often does. It weakens the systems that protect life long after the immediate moment of violence is over.
It also lands on top of older problems. Lebanon was already carrying deep economic and social strain. So this isn't a crisis arriving in an otherwise stable place. It's a new shock hitting a society that was already exhausted.
Now, let's widen the picture. One of the strongest signs that a conflict is becoming regional is what happens at the borders.
Because the moment people begin to worry about whether crossings will remain open, war stops feeling distant. It becomes immediate.
People start asking different questions. Can we leave if we need to? Can our relatives come here? Will refugees be allowed through? Will there be shelter? Will humanitarian agencies be able to help?
And for families near border areas, those questions aren't theoretical. They shape real decisions. Whether to wait, whether to leave early, whether to move elderly parents, whether to send children somewhere safer, whether to keep working or prepare to flee.
That uncertainty can be emotionally overwhelming because it removes the feeling of control. Even people who are not yet displaced begin to live as if they might be.
And in a region where many communities already carry memories of earlier wars, sanctions, invasions, and displacement, that uncertainty is even heavier. It doesn't arrive alone. It arrives with memory.
Another major issue right now is the pressure created by internal displacement and the possibility of cross-border movement.
When large numbers of people are displaced inside a country, neighboring countries begin preparing for what may happen next. Even before major refugee flows fully develop, governments, aid groups, and border authorities start adjusting.
That means planning for shelter, registration, food supply, medical services, emergency transportation, protection for vulnerable people.
And from a human perspective, internal displacement is already devastating on its own. People lose normality first, then income, then privacy, then stability. Then time itself starts to feel strange because nobody knows how temporary really is.
That's such an important point. Temporary displacement often sounds manageable when you hear it in official language, but for families living it, it can feel endless.
Especially when children ask questions nobody can answer. When can we go home? Is our house still there? Are my friends okay? Will I go back to school? These are the quiet questions of war.
Another place where the wider regional pressure is being felt is Gaza.
And what matters there is not only direct violence, but the fragility of daily life under disruption. When borders tighten or supply routes are affected, food, medicine, electricity, and fuel all become more fragile.
And in a place already operating under severe strain, even a small additional disruption can have enormous effects.
If fuel is delayed, hospital generators come under pressure. If food access weakens, families reduce meals or rely on less nutritious options. If medicine is delayed, treatment becomes inconsistent. If movement is restricted, people cannot respond to emergencies the way they normally would.
And what that creates is a life built around constant calculation. How much food is left? How much fuel do we have? Should we save this medicine? Can we afford to use the generator? Will aid arrive tomorrow?
War often forces civilians into a mindset of management under scarcity, and that kind of living wears people down, even if they survive it physically.
There's another dimension of this war that may sound less dramatic at first, but it's deeply important. Mobility.
Yes, flights, airports, and travel routes across the region have been disrupted, and that affects far more than tourism.
It affects migrant workers trying to return to jobs, students traveling for study, patients needing treatment abroad, families trying to reunite, business people moving goods or maintaining partnerships, people simply trying to get home.
And when air travel becomes uncertain, the psychological effect is powerful too. People stop trusting schedules. They stop trusting that tomorrow's route will still be open. They start planning around disruption instead of possibility.
Which means war begins to affect even those who are not displaced. A business owner may cancel travel. A family may postpone a reunion. A patient may lose an appointment. A worker may miss their job.
And for countries in the Gulf and across the broader Middle East that depend on aviation, hospitality, and business travel, those disruptions also become economic stress.
So a war in one part of the region can hurt a hotel in another, a transport company in another, a student in another, a patient in another. That's what regional impact really means.
Then there's the economic side, and this is where the war enters people's lives quietly but persistently.
When shipping routes are disrupted and energy flows are threatened, families feel it through prices.
Fuel prices rise, transport costs rise, imported goods become more expensive, businesses absorb more pressure, households begin cutting back.
And this is not some distant market issue for most people. It becomes immediate. It becomes a grocery bill, a utility bill, a taxi fare, a business expense, a restaurant supply cost, a delayed shipment, a smaller margin, a harder month.
For many people across the Middle East, that means daily life becomes tighter, less flexibility, more anxiety, more waiting, more calculation.
And when economic pressure grows during a regional war, it can deepen existing frustration. People who are already stretched by inflation or instability feel another layer of stress.
Which is why some people may not be directly in danger from military action and still feel deeply affected, because war can reach people through economics long before it reaches them through direct force.
We should also talk about humanitarian logistics, because this is one of the most serious but least visible aspects of the crisis.
When air routes, sea routes, and land corridors are disrupted, humanitarian aid slows down. And once aid slows down, every vulnerable group becomes more vulnerable.
A delayed food shipment can mean hunger worsens. A delayed medical shipment can mean treatment is interrupted. A delayed shelter shipment can leave families exposed longer. A delayed water system delivery can lead to sanitation risks.
And what makes this especially dangerous is that many aid systems in the region were already stretched before this latest escalation. So delay is not entering an empty system. It is entering a system already under pressure.
That means humanitarian workers are often forced into impossible decisions. Who gets help first? What gets delayed? What gets reduced? What can wait? And what absolutely cannot?
And behind every one of those decisions is a human being who needs something urgently.
There's also a less visible reality we have to talk about: the emotional climate.
Because even in places not currently facing direct attacks or mass displacement, many people across the Middle East are living with renewed fear.
Fear of escalation, fear of the war spreading, fear that major infrastructure could be hit, fear that borders may close, fear that life could change suddenly.
And where communities have already lived through earlier wars, displacement, sanctions, or collapse, this moment can reopen emotional wounds.
Sometimes war travels through memory before it travels through geography.
That's powerful, because a person hearing a news alert today may not only be reacting to today, they may also be reacting to what happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or in childhood.
And that affects sleep, trust, planning, parenting, and the ability to imagine a future. War doesn't only damage buildings, it changes how people hold themselves inside time.
It makes long-term thinking harder. It makes people feel as if life can be interrupted at any moment.
So, how do we talk about all of this without turning it into propaganda or choosing one national narrative over another?
We focus on the human systems being affected.
Hospitals in Lebanon, border communities near Syria and Iran, families in Gaza facing fragile supplies, air travelers across the Gulf, workers, businesses, and households feeling economic pressure, aid routes struggling across the region.
And once you look at it that way, the most important question is no longer just what is happening militarily.
It becomes, how are people living through it?
Who is losing safety? Who is losing access? Who is losing routine? Who is losing the ability to plan? Who is living under fear?
And that is where the real regional story is right now.
If there is one thing this moment reveals, it's that war in the Middle East does not stay neatly contained. It radiates.
Into displacement, into healthcare, into schools, into food and fuel prices, into airports and shipping lanes, into aid systems, into family choices, into fear.
And that's why this matters as a regional human story, not just a geopolitical one.
Because behind every canceled flight, every delayed shipment, every crowded shelter, every damaged clinic, and every family on the move, there is a person trying to continue life under impossible pressure.
And that person may not appear in the headline, but they are living the headline.
This has been People Deserve to Live.
Thank you for listening.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
And let us know your thoughts in the comments.
Stay safe, stay thoughtful, and we'll see you next time.